So I think we're almost ready to get going. I know it's like old home week here. People are catching up with friends, and there's, of course, the front row is empty. I won't be bad and move everybody from the back row up to the front row. They'll probably never talk to me again if I did that. But please come up. There's lots of seats, so fill in. Well, only 6 minutes late. I think Chuck would forgive us. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the celebration of life for Dr. Charles Slonecker, known to some as Dr. Slonecker, others as Charlie, but I think by most of us as Chuck. But whatever name you knew him by, he was a highly respected colleague, mentor, and teacher, and a wonderful boss and friend. I want to start, as we do all ceremonies on campus, by acknowledging that we're on the ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam. My name is Eilish Courtney, and I'm the current director of ceremonies, a title I assumed after Chuck retired in 2003. And at that time then, we drafted in Professor Nancy Hermiston to take on the academic and host responsibilities of Chuck's position, and we gave her the fancy title of University Marshal. And you'll hear from Nancy later on in the program when she'll share some personal stories about Chuck, as will our other speakers. Delighted to see such a big group here today, faculty colleagues, emeriti, current and former staff from the department, as well as from ceremonies, external relations, and across campus, former students, alumni, and non-UBC colleagues from different organizations, and of course friends. We're delighted that so many of you could join us. I want to particularly welcome the Slonecker family. Some of you have already met the family on the way in, but of course dear Jan, who needs no introduction in this community, and she's accompanied by her 3 sons, David, Darren, and Johnny, and his wife Tanya, and we're really thrilled to have you all here. Now, Chuck's clear instruction to the family was that there was to be no sad funerals, no memorial, no sad, there was not to be, no tears. Oh, we'll try that one, but anyway. But they did agree to having, in conversation with the family during the summer, they knew how important it was for the UBC community to have something. So we decided to have a celebration of life. So we could gather and remember him, and that's exactly what he would have wanted, a big party with all his friends. So we took Chuck and Jan's love for Hawaii, and we made it a bit of a theme to add some color to the celebration. And thank you for all getting it. I'm thrilled to see everybody's wearing a lei. I appreciate that. And we have selected music also for the reception that will hopefully keep your toes tapping. Chuck's involvement, of course, as you all know, with UBC is extensive. If I was to list everything he did on campus, we'd be here for quite a while. Between his 35 years of service to the department, over 17 on Senate, 13 years as head of ceremonies, as well as a number of years as Director of University Relations, which was a completely separate job, and 2 years as Acting VP of External Affairs. He's a member of the Tributes Committee, President's Service Award Committee, Association of Professors Emeriti, PACE, Alumni UBC. He chaired the United Way campaign, the President's Committee on Student Discipline. And of course, he and Jan chaired the Westbrook Society and were senior volunteers with the Development Office, and the list goes on. And this is only his on-campus activities. He also volunteered as a board member for organizations off campus. Frankly, I don't know how the man fit it all in. And then he'd come in and he'd say, I read this fabulous book. And I'm thinking, how did you get time to read? But anyway, today is about the stories. We're here to share stories about how we will remember Chuck. Before we move on, I have to share a fun graphic with you. This is Captain Fantastic. So I can't take credit for this, but it kind of sums up what the staff of External Affairs portfolio, current and former, thought of Chuck. when we had a thank you event for him when he finished his 2-year stint as VP External, the Public Affairs Office, and some staff may be here, some guilty people may be here, they created this. This is an album, for those that don't know, it's an album cover from Elton John, and it's Captain Fantastic, and because it's Chuck's word, right, everything was fantastic. So we got his face superimposed. Anyway, it's a bit of fun, but it summed up Chuck. It was really just what he is, full of fun. I started working with Chuck in early 1992 when I moved into ceremonies. Joan King, the then manager of the office, was heading off for her annual trip to Barbados. And with one person out sick, I was drafted into the office. I was interested in events, and little did I know where it would lead me. My first big project was the official opening of UBC Ritz-Macon House. This was the first joint residence with UBC and another university, and it was a Japanese university, so full of protocol, a lot of crossing of T's and dotting of I's. Chuck was just phenomenal to work with. He was so supportive, so helpful, and it was a real pleasure to work with him. And then with Joan and the rest of the gang in ceremonies, I knew I'd found a good home with a great bunch of people. Joan and I were chatting the other night too, and lots of stories came up, but one I have to share, because I know Jan will remember this one, about the road trips to Kamloops and Kelowna. Now, this was in the days when UBC did joint degrees with the colleges there, and so when it came to grad time, ceremonies had to pack a van, not only with the regalia of the Chancellor and the President, but more importantly, the Chancellor's chair was packed in the back, and the mace was safely secured to the roof rack. I say safely secured as it did make it there and back a few times, even though there is a story of Joan's shoelace being used by Chuck at one point to tie down the tarp over the mace as they hit the highway to the Okanagan. And of course, Chuck insisted on stopping at every Tim Hortons between here and there for a double-double and a donut. Right, Jan? I tell this story because, I mean, to me, it exemplifies how Chuck was always just willing to get in there and do whatever it took to help us get the job done and have fun at the same time. Oh, and one of the other things I remember about Chuck is how generous he was with his time, no matter who needed help or advice. I was again reminded of this the day we heard he had passed. Nancy and I were in Okanagan for their grad, and in some ways it was hard, but in not too many people there knew Chuck, so we were able to regain our focus and work away on grad. And then in the afternoon, a professor I only vaguely know came up to me and he said he was really sorry to hear about Chuck. And he caught me off guard a bit, and I said, oh, did you know him? I didn't realize he was that well known in this campus. He said, oh, he was on the Okanagan Student Discipline Committee, and he had been asked to be chair. He was advised by Hubert to talk to Chuck about his experiences as chair of the Vancouver Committee. The professor said that Chuck was so gracious, so generous with his time and so helpful. He was very impressed and grateful to Chuck for all the time and information he gave. Are we surprised? No, not at all. Right up to just before Chuck stopped working, he continued to contribute in great ways to the university. So now it's time for me to stop talking and welcome our first two speakers, both of whom are close friends of Chuck's. First we'll have Ian Slater, and then we'll have Bill O'Val. Thank you.
Afternoon. I knew Chuck for about 43 years. I was calculating the other night. I knew him both when I was an undergraduate and when I went through and got my PhD. And he and I would spend hours talking about favorite books of ours. As has already been mentioned, he was a voracious reader. He also had a very good memory of what he read, which is important. He also had a very good sense of humor. And I remember during some of our lunch hours at the faculty club, at the coffee shop, I would be talking to him about either George Orwell, who was the subject of my thesis, or anything at all, and Chuck would know something about it and have something useful to say. And also, as I indicated earlier, he had a magnificent sense of humour. One story in particular keeps turning up to me. There are many, but I've just chosen this one. I hope you'll think it's amusing. I did. And Chuck told me in the faculty club one time, and after he told me the incident, I burst out laughing so loudly, every head in the coffee shop was turned to our table. And this is the story. Before UBC was even a thought in his mind, Chuck applied at one time for a position in the Southern University. He went down for the interview, and there was the usual table of academics, etc. And Chuck said, everything seemed to be going well. But then he said, it happened, a kind of kiss of death. And I said, what went wrong? He said, well, there was this gentleman who'd been sitting at the far end of the table, and Chuck's description of him conjured up the chap who was in the Kentucky Fried Chicken ad, you know, guy in a white suit. And he said, everybody else had spoken, and finally this gentleman leaned over and he said, Slonecker. I think, yes. Spell the name just so he was sure he had it. And he said, this chap fixed me with the most magnificent smile and said to Chuck, I don't believe I know your daddy. And at that point, Chuck said, I knew I was finished. I shouldn't even have left Vancouver. I shouldn't have got on the aircraft. I should have just stayed at home. Because I don't believe I know your daddy was dead in the southern United States. It seemed to me amusing at the time. Chuck thought it was very funny. But it came up to me many times after that story, because Chuck, out of all the people I've known, was probably one of the least impressed with whoever was your daddy. If your daddy was famous, that was fine. If no one had ever heard of him, that was fine. What mattered was that you mattered, and that you would have to make your own way. And I think at UBC, that was a bracing kind of story for me and for many others who came through this institution. Because Chuck measured someone on their own, on their own ground and their own merits. It's not a terribly profound story I'm giving you, but it seems to me to come through time and again whenever I think of Chuck. I won't carry on much longer, I know. There's a long line of speakers. But I just want to share that with you because it was the kind of man he was. Thank you.
Jan, Darren, David, John, friends and colleagues, welcome. They broke the mold back in 1938, the day that Charles E. Slonecker was born in the small fishing village of Gig Harbor, Washington. Fondly known to us as Chuck or Charlie, there's never been a star to match him. Chuck and I go back 44 years. True friend, exceptional colleague, master of his discipline. Aloha in the Hawaiian language means sending and receiving positive energy that's enduring and never gone. A kind heart, good feelings for others. These are traits of character that Chuck expressed throughout his life in his charm and compassion. So with this vintage shirt and spirit of aloha, it's a great honor and pleasure to talk story. Chuck joins UBC's anatomy department in 1968 at the tender age of 29. During a long, productive, and multifaceted career, he excelled as an outstanding educator and role model who introduced thousands of medical, dental, and graduate students to human anatomy in all its glory, from gross anatomy down to the microscopic level, embryology to neuroanatomy, radiological imaging to surface or living anatomy. He did it all. Co-author of a brilliant textbook, Grant's Method of Anatomy, he continues to inspire and impact students, teachers, and healthcare workers worldwide. Also a talented researcher, his first love was the new emerging field of immunology. In the day, he did pioneering work on lymphoid organs and important cells called lymphocytes. You know, my earliest memory of Chuck is back in the spring of 1970. I know some of you weren't born yet. Just as my graduate work was nearing completion, it was time for me to present my doctoral findings at an American Association of Anatomists meeting held that year in the windy city of Chicago. Fortunately, Dr. Slonecker was in the audience that year. It was jam-packed. I confess I was a bit nervous and awestruck and intimidated, but he came up after my talk with such flair, a mighty grin on his face and a handshake, and he boldly said, "You know, we could sure use you in Vancouver, so come on down, check it out, join our department. Matter of fact, I'll even project your slides for you. Gonna be fantastic," he said. But where is Vancouver? I thought. For a Philadelphia boy, wet behind the ears, this was not something I could have ever anticipated. I tell you, it was fantastic. Beyond my wildest dreams, week after week, year after year, I had the privilege of learning from one of the masters. Larger than life, charismatic yet heartfelt, he filled rooms with his vivid personality, vast knowledge, and incredible sense of humor. Always fun to be around, and with boundless positive energy, he led life with a strong vocation to many things he felt passionate about, making them part of his personal identity. No one could match his sense of duty, commitment to helping others, and fearless pride of academic tradition, all with such exuberance. His knack for public speaking was obvious. Whenever I attended a lecture of his, I sat transfixed, totally engaged. Downright captivating and memorable, he'd blurt out the strangest and darndest things like, "You know, it's as easy as duck soup," or, "I bet you dollars to donuts, Bernie and Wayne, that the basal ganglia in the brain are bigger than old Buck Jones." An entertainer and natural-born storyteller, he made the most complex ideas simple and the simplest ideas positively persuasive, whether tracing a B lymphocyte circulating through lymph nodes on its way to becoming a plasma cell to produce antibodies, demonstrating the beauty of the human cerebellum, teaching orthopedic surgeons clinical anatomy, or at the dissection table telling students, "You know what, guys? The sciatic nerve, it's so big you could swing off of it." always breathing new life into his teaching, he took profound pleasure in knowing names and backgrounds of most of the students in his classroom, calling them often by first name. Hey, in the back row there, you, all the way in the back. Mara Louise from Kelowna, right? What was your question? He would say. Chuck warmly embraced new graduate students in our department and junior faculty members, often taking them under his wing, but also making them feel how immensely important they were. But he also maintained close personal contact with many in the generation that preceded him, his professional forebears, who he admired, folks like Dr. Sidney and Constance Friedman in anatomy, who were founders of the medical school in 1950, Al Bogie, class of 1954 in the first medical class, William Gibson, former chancellor at UVic, and our own Bill Weber, former dean of medicine at UBC, and countless others. Some of you are here in the audience, I can see. Here's an example of the Sloneckers' generous spirit. You know, Chuck and Jan had convinced Dr. Friedman not long ago, when he was well into his 90s and all alone, to accompany them on their holidays to faraway places. Pack your bags, boss, he would say. We're taking you on a cruise to Alaska. And they did. And now we're going to Europe. First to France, then we're going to cross the Channel and go to England and London and stay at the Savoy Hotel. And finally, their beloved Hawaii, where they had fun on Waikiki Beach. When Chuck was head of anatomy in the 80s and 90s, I have clear visions of how he would saunter down the hallways, clicking his heels, and often whistling a happy tune. Get this. So, well in advance, I always knew when my boss was approaching. On early mornings, I would often catch a glimpse of him walking along University Boulevard from one end to the other on his daily walks to work. He'd be talking to himself and waving his arms this way and that way. I was on the number 4 trolley bus from Kitsilano coming into campus, staring out the window in total disbelief. You see, he was simply rehearsing an upcoming lecture for that day in his own style. Passionate about the students he taught, believe me, the quest for truth and accuracy were tattooed to his heart. I got to share one memory of Chuck's fearless and sometimes impulsive nature, and I think you'll all get a kick out of this one. You know, for him, the classroom and teaching laboratory were hallowed ground. In the midst of his lecture many years ago on the cranial nerves, he was actually drawing sketches with colored chalk on the blackboard. Good old days. And in the middle of his drawings, a student actually fell asleep at her seat. So he immediately looks up, picks up a piece of colored chalk, and tosses it in her direction. It splattered on the floor, made a big noise, and it woke her up. "Miss Jones," he said, "this is a lecture theater, not a rec room. If you need to sleep, please, outside, down the hallway, out to the student lounge." Well, after lecture, Miss Jones approached Dr. Slonecker. "Dr. Slonecker," she said, "you know, I really didn't appreciate you embarrassing me in front of all of my classmates. So I think I'm going to report you to the UBC Student Discipline Committee." "Good, you betcha," he said. "I'm chairman of that committee, and I look forward to seeing you there." One of the last things he did for me was to take me on a personal tour of campus one sunny day last fall. He was at the wheel of his car, Jan, his trusty co-pilot, right beside him where she always is. I was in the back seat. Bob was scrunched in beside me on my left, Carol Ann Lang on my right. We were like new kids on the block, keenly attentive to his animated excursion of UBC's campus. I tell you, I wish you all could have been there. He was so very proud in pointing out all the new buildings and even the green spaces and the playing fields. You see that baseball diamond over there, he said? It's the best one this side of the Rocky Mountains. All as his beloved UBC was evolving. Wow. What a fantastic ride it was. So today, I toast Chuck and thank him for transforming my life so profoundly. While I'll miss him as mentor and friend, I know and I'm comforted by the fact that his achievements, dedication to students, legacy of service are enduring and will continue to exemplify the very special person he's been to us all. And imagine, whenever we feel the need to be with him, I know where his spirit will be. Right here on campus, 300 yards down that road by the old anatomy building, now called the Friedman Building, on the south side. He'd be watching the sunset with a big smile on his face and a glorious sparkle in his eyes. May his memory be for a blessing. Master of the house, please. Master of the House, you probably all know it. It's a catchy tune from Les Miserables, and the group could probably come in now for a moment. It really sums up Chuck to a T. And I'm going to sing the first 3 verses for you very quickly as a rehearsal, because we're all going to do it together. That's what Chuck used to do. He'd get everyone to be involved. And then after I sing the 3 little stanzas, this incredible group will then chime in with the rest of you, and I'll put the words up on the board for you, and then you'll be able to appreciate them. And here we go. Are we here, everyone? Master of the House from Les Miserables. Master of the house, doling out the charm, ready with a handshake and an open arm, tells a saucy tale, makes a little spin. Everyone appreciates a bon vivre, everyone's good companion, gives him everything he's got. So let's raise a toast for Chuck, master of the house. So let's raise a toast for Chuck, master of the house. 1, 2, 3.
Master of the house, doling out the charm, ready with a handshake and an open arm, tells a saucy tale, makes a little stir. Everyone appreciates a bon vivre, everyone's one companion, gives him everything he's got. So let's raise a toast to Chuck, he's the master of the house. Master of the house,
wow, that gave me goosebumps. Obviously, I think Nancy brought all the opera ensemble here. It's just a powerful sound, and of course Chuck and Jan were huge, huge supporters. Practically went to, I think, every single opera performance there was at UBC, so it's only fitting that we bring them all here. So thank you, Ian, thank you, Bill. From the time Chuck started at UBC in 1968, he saw 7 presidents come and go and 10 chancellors. And of course, in his role as Director of Ceremonies, he worked particularly closely with 2 presidents, as he and Jan, along with other staff from Ceremonies, spent a lot of time in their house, the President's Residence, Norman Mackenzie House. So we're really honored to have both of those presidents here today. Dr. David Strangway, who listened to Joan when she suggested that Chuck be appointed Director of Ceremonies, and who worked with Chuck for 7 years. And then we'll hear Dr. Martha Piper, who worked with Chuck for the last 6 years of his appointment in Ceremonies. And they'll now share some stories. David.
What a special occasion. Chuck was such a special person. I think especially for the presidents of this university, and I sure will hear from Martha about that in a couple of minutes. This is an occasion to celebrate what I consider one of UBC's most distinguished and passionate people. We've heard some of that already, but what a passionate individual he was. It's a word I keep thinking about when I think about Chuck. He cared about things. It really mattered to him what he was engaged in and involved with. In celebrating him, we remind ourselves of the many, many events, lots and lots of events that he was involved in. In fact, I almost have the feeling that as I'm standing here, I should look over and see whether Chuck's over there giving me the wave to let me know everything's okay. Because Chuck was always sure that things were under control, and he let you know that things were under control if you were getting off track in any way. So although he's not there, I must say I keep thinking about it when there's an event when this kind of event's taking place. You could count on him and his loyal team to be sure that each graduation ceremony was a success, as thousands and thousands of students crossed the platform, one after another, each one to be recognized individually. These were really joyous occasions in which the Chancellor and the President stood side by side, greeting every single one of these thousands of students as they crossed the platform. Only once was there a minor breakdown in that process that I remember, and this was the occasion when they let one student come up who stood in front of the Chancellor, and he opened his gown up and he had absolutely nothing. He was stark naked underneath. So I thought I had to say something to Ceremonies about, you got to monitor this one a little more closely. People often ask me how I dealt with the large number of graduations. I always had 2 answers to the question. First question was, Chuck's there. I don't need to worry about it. I just do what Chuck and his team tell me to do, and that's good. So that part was easy because it was under their and his control. Second, I also pointed out that as a university president, this was the only time in my timetable that I could not be reached by phone or fax or email or anything else, and everybody in the room was happy. The students were happy. The parents were happy, the friends were happy. Can you imagine those number of hours in a President's Day in which there's nothing except pleasure and happiness and not a single complaint? But Chuck and the team did so much more than that. When we had honorary degree recipients coming, the honorary degree recipients were always very well taken care of. They were looked after, and the accompanying events and receptions always went off very, very well done. Once a year, we used to have a party for deans and vice presidents that was done with a costume theme. People had to come in costume. The idea was that since there were always certain tensions between presidents and deans and vice presidents and so on, that the idea of being in costume kind of broke down the barrier. So we really had wonderful conversations about things that things were interesting but didn't really matter very much in these events. Chuck and Jan always got into the swing of these events, and they always got into coming with original costumes. There was one event called Strangway's Saloon, and they came ready and outfitted for Strangway's Saloon. There was another time when we had an event that was called Alice in Wonderland, and Joan King was just reminding me that everybody had to be upside down, basically, in one way or another in order to deal with this. In fact, she mentioned to me that getting ready for the Alice in Wonderland party, she went all over the city trying to find broken and cracked dishes that she could bring for the Alice in Wonderland event. One year we had a nutcracker event, and Chuck, if I remember rightly, came dressed as a nutcracker. Well, it's an interesting symbol to think of Chuck as a nutcracker. I always knew that once in a while I would be late to an event at the house, and I always knew that if I was late, as I walked up to the house and looked through the window, I could see Chuck and Jan there. I knew everything was okay, and they probably didn't even miss me because things were going just fine without me. But it was a great relief and so on to know that those things were happening and taken care of. There was also some other events that we had, tell you a little bit about. Several years we had a costume croquet party. The costume croquet party was held on the lawn of Norman Mackenzie House. And the idea of the costume croquet party was a lot of fun on one hand and fundraising on the other. The concept was the brainchild of Norm Young and Norm Watt. Norm Squared, as we called them. The winner was awarded a piece of the world's worst art. That was the prize for the costume croquet party. But who was always there participating and making sure that things were going right and appropriately dressed for the costume croquet party was Chuck and Jan. They were always there as participants and were really very good at that. In the spring of 1990, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of UBC. There are different dates for UBC, of course, because sometimes it was 1906 when the legislation was passed. Sometimes it was 1912, I think, when Westbrook was recruited. Sometimes it was 1915, which is when the first students actually transferred from the McGill campus to the UBC campus. So we picked 1990 as the 75th anniversary based on the first students coming to UBC. This event was an incredibly big event. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people that came out to this campus over the long weekend and participated in every activity you can imagine. They were taking place in every department, in every faculty. I'm sure something was going on in anatomy. I don't know what it was, but there was... Who oversaw this great success? Well, once again, Chuck and Jan. They were there making sure that all of these good things happened and that the ceremonies people and all the rest of the campus were deeply engaged. Yes, we miss Chuck Slonecker, Director of Ceremonies. We've heard about his role as a faculty of medicine. It seems right that we should be here celebrating his life. He was so profoundly committed in the roles that I had with him that the celebration of everything that UBC stood for. We miss him. We want Jan to know how much we appreciated them both and their deep contribution to the life of an institution. He made UBC a better place. Thank you.
Jan, your family, we're so pleased to have you here, and our hearts go out to all of you. Everyone loved Chuck. He was adored. He was adored by his family, his students, faculty, staff, alumni, and administrators alike. As we've heard, having joined the Department of Anatomy in 1968, Chuck spent his entire career at UBC, serving as head of the department from 1984 to 1995, and then, of course, director of ceremonies from 1990 until his retirement in 2003. During my presidency, I was fortunate to be able to ask him to step up as acting Vice President of External Affairs, which he did willingly and generously. Chuck lived every moment at UBC in the present, giving of his time and his talents, assisting others to be the best they could be, and representing the university in the external world with grace and dignity. Now, the first time I met Chuck Slonecker was in his role as Director of Ceremonies when we were planning my installation as President. I told him quite excitedly that I wanted to have baseball caps to give to everyone who was going to attend, or more specifically, thinking caps. And I needed his help in terms of, acquiring these baseball caps. I thought it was a grand idea. Chuck stopped, paused, and took a deep breath. I could see he was a bit troubled by the idea that it perhaps was breaking protocol, and he began to question my sanity. But then he said something like this: "Of course, leave it to me. I'll get it done." And the rest is history. This introductory meeting, in my mind, symbolized what made Chuck unique. Always willing to do his part, never criticizing, always supporting the university regardless of what crazy ideas the president might have, always a team player. Has anyone in this room ever heard Chuck Slonecker say a negative word about any person or any endeavor or any initiative? I never did. And I certainly provided him with a lot of material. One of my fondest memories of Chuck entails his car, a wonderful Cadillac that he drove with pride. I cannot tell you how many times he chauffeured me to events: football and baseball, T-bird games, United Way meetings, government ceremonies, and donor receptions. Chuck was always there, always on the go, always available, always generous with his time and willingness to lend a helping hand. But perhaps my fondest memory of Chuck entails the Norman Mackenzie House, as David has already said. Every dinner, every reception, every special event that we hosted at the house, and there were hundreds and hundreds of events, and hundreds of events, Chuck and Jan were there. I would be rushing home to change, reading the briefing notes on the way, always late, catching my breath, but knowing all the time Chuck and Jan would be there. Greeting people, making people feel welcome, smiling his broad smile, representing the best of UBC. No president could be luckier to have had Chuck and Jan always there. I never had to worry. They provided me with the confidence and knowledge that all was well. It was a marvel. It was magical what they did. Someone once said to me, "How do you pick the menus?" I said, "I don't pick the menus. I have no idea what we're going to eat until I sit down and served it. But I know Chuck and Jen and their staff have overseen that, and the menu will be perfect. The guests will be taken care of. Every tradition, every culture will be looked after. Every event will be fantastic." They were there, never late, always happy, never complaining, always there for the president. And it wasn't just when guests arrived. In addition to being the first to appear, they were always the last to leave. After every guest had been looked after, thanked, and taken care of, safely ensconced in a taxi or a car, given directions, told how to get out of the drive, they took care of everything. They stayed long after I had scooted upstairs exhausted, making sure the house was locked and secure when they left. Every event, every dinner, every reception. David, I don't think they missed one event in the entire time. Now, we had a standing joke, the three of us. Jan, I don't know if you remember it. When the bewitching hour was approaching, and I was anxious to disappear, knowing I had work to do before I slept, Chuck would saunter over to me and whisper in my ear, "Would you like me to flick the lights?" It never failed to bring a smile to my face and a chuckle between us. It was his way of telling me that it was okay for me to exit, that he would look after the guests, that he would take care of whatever needed to be taken care of. I was off duty. Since June 10th, I have thought of Chuck Slonecker almost every day, marveling at how he made us all feel so much better in what we did every day for UBC. I can't help but think it is now my turn to say to him, "Would you like me to flick the lights?" Signaling that as difficult as it is okay for him to leave us, that we will all look after his legacy, learning from him, striving to be just a little bit better, just a little bit more like Chuck, being better for it, and remembering the incredible joy he brought to all of our lives.
So thank you, David, and thank you, Martha. As we have mentioned before, Chuck was a man with many interests. He loved sport, and he got his big block sweater in recognition of his support for varsity athletics on campus. And of course, he was a great golfer, right? And I know some of his golfing buddies are here today. And he was on the committee of the annual golf tournament. So he, as I said, I don't know where he found the time to do all of this. He was a huge believer in community, though, not only on campus but off campus. As was mentioned before, he chaired the UBC United Way campaign, but he also sat on the Lower Mainland campaign cabinet overseeing the education sector, and he was the leadership chair for many years. And of course, he was a big fan of the arts and was involved in various ways with a number of arts organisations in the community. And here to share a little more about some of those connections is Christopher Gaze, founder of Bard on the Beach, and then who will be followed by our own Nancy Hermiston. Thank you.
Thank you. You can shed tears that he is gone, or you can smile because he has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he'll come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he is gone, or you can cherish his memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what he would want. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. Chuck was a major force inside Bard on the Beach. We created this festival 27 years ago, and Chuck came in at, maybe we were 12 or 13, at a really important time as we were doing very well, but suddenly with his effervescent presence on the board, we started to do really, really well. We have some board members here today from Bard on the Beach, from days gone by, Jackie Kelly and Margie Knox, and maybe there are others here too. But a lot of people did a lot of things for our Shakespeare Festival, but Chuck was there for some very, very important times. 6 years ago, we raised $3.4 million to change our site, essentially, and get that big theatre built. And then we raised a good 14 million more just at the end of Chuck's tenure on our board. So close to $20 million to make Bard strong. And Chuck was there. What a fundraiser he was. Fantastic. If you wanted to raise money, as has been said before, that's why he was there with the presidents of this university, because he knew how to do it, and it just came from his heart, and it was just who he was. Couldn't help it. And it was always wonderful at Bard for the opening nights. Chuck, I mean, look at this man. I've never used the phrase before, but others have used it, not about me, but other handsome men, GQ. I mean, this guy was a really handsome man. And he always turned out, looking beautiful and handsome, and gorgeous Jan with him. And wherever they went, opening night, they were there all the opening nights. And their very presence helped to make it something special. Always at board meetings, he'd catch my eye towards the end of the meeting, and he'd say, and I say, yes, because we only have one car in our family, and he always had a car, and he always took me home. And sometimes, Jan, there was a flashy one you had, and then there was this older one, right? Yeah, that's right. I think I generally had the older one, but anyway. But he knew that the arts, he just felt it through every fiber of his body, that the arts were the linchpin. And you've heard all these fancy dress parties and the way he'd get dressed up and come in and just have a ball. That's the essence of the arts and the liveliness and animation of our lives. And so his very presence at Bard on the Beach was just perfect. He was the linchpin, he was the key that joined Nancy Hermiston and this fantastic program of UBC Opera. He brought that to Bard. He kept saying to me, just after he came to the board, he said, you need to call Nancy, you know. Call Nancy. I think we can do something. And of course we have, and we've worked together for a long, long time now. And UBC Opera and the Vancouver Opera Orchestra play at Bard on the Beach every summer now. And it's a big event and thousands of people come. He made that happen. He made that happen. He also recognized that when I was about 56 or so, and I liked golf, that I should be a member of the same group that he was a member of, the UBC men's group. And he said, get your name down. I'll get your name down. And so that when I became 60, I could get off that waiting list and become a member. And I'm a member because of Chuck. The 19th century Swiss philosopher Henri Emile famously wrote, life is short. We don't have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel the way with us. So be quick to love, make haste to be kind. And that was Chuck, through and through. And you've heard that from others. He also reached out just before he came on the Bard board. He made sure, through a couple of years on the board of PAL, the Performers Arts Lodge, which is right down just near Stanley Park behind the Bay Shore. And that's a home for actors, artists, musicians, people who have been in the arts who don't have much, never had much. But he knew it was important to get that building built. And it happened. And not on the outskirts of the city in some grotty area, but right in the heart of it, because the arts are that important. And that was a wonderful thing to do. I'll just finish perhaps with a little Shakespeare, because I think he loved that. This is the dirge, if you like, or the beautiful poem, the beautiful song, which I'm not going to sing, I'm going to recite, from Cymbeline. But it's beautiful words. And you think of this man, of course you are. Fear no more the heat of the sun, nor the furious winter's rages. Thou thy worldly task hast done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must, as chimney sweepers, come to dust. Fear no more the frown of the great, thou art past the tyrant's stroke. Care no more to clothe and eat. To thee the reed is as the oak. The scepter, learning, physic must all follow this and come to dust. Fear no more the lightning flash, nor the all-dreaded thunderstone. Fear not slander, censure rash. Thou hast finished joy and moan. All lovers young, all lovers must consign to thee and come to dust. No exorciser harm thee, nor no witchcraft charm thee. Ghost unlaid forbear thee, nothing ill come near thee. Quiet consummation have, and renowned be thy grave.
So I came to UBC in 1995. And the first time I believe that I saw Chuck and Jan was on October 15th in 1995, because I had to do an open house. And I was just here and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? But anyway, I did in the old odd. And there were tables on the stage and there was a huge audience of 50 people, of which 2 were Chuck and Jan. And I said hello to them and I wondered they were such a gorgeous couple. I thought, oh, those are such interesting people. And so the year went along, and in 1996, I was graduating my very first class. And being a new faculty member, I was a little shy, and I didn't know whether I should be processing with that academic procession or not. So I slipped into the audience, and I watched graduation. And that same handsome man came out there, and he was making everything work. I thought, that guy is a show business guy. And who is that guy, right? And I just watched him in amazement at how everything was so fantastic. And so then I get a phone call in 1997, and I noticed that the audiences were increasing, but this couple was always there. And it was so nice to see them. And then in 1997, I get a call to come along because Dr. Strangway was having an event at the New Chance Center at the end of the year in May, and would I bring some lively music and some fun to the event? And I just happened to have staged the grisettes from The Merry Widow. Well, you know what grisettes are like. So I thought, well, hopefully President Strangway won't fire me for bringing that troupe. And then we did the Viber Marsh, which is also from The Merry Widow, and everybody was dancing and can-canning, and there was a few Italian canzonettas, and at the end of the night, Chuck Slonecker came up to me and he said, Nancy, that was fantastic. We have to do more of that. And he never, ever doubted that I could do anything. He didn't really know me that well, but he just kept asking me to do events, and so we did. And the more and more events we did, the more we got known, the more people would ask us. And Chuck was always there, and he was steering people towards us, which helped my budget of $1,200 for the opera and voice division tremendously. In fact, many times it used to double it immediately. So that was so great. And you know, in that 1997, there was an honorary degrees reception. I believe it was for Ben Heppner. Anyway, Ben was there. And I had a friend from the Czech Republic with me, actually. He was my husband at the time, right? We'll leave that there. But anyway, so he happened to be an anatomist. He was a doctor. And so I said to him, well, we're going to this honorary degree reception because it's Ben Heppner. And he knew who Ben was, and he said, oh, that's wonderful. So anyway, I walked in, and then I saw Chuck, and I said, oh, Radek, I want you to meet Chuck Slonecker. And so he introduced, and then somebody interrupted us because Chuck and Jan were always so popular. So he was taken away, and Radek said, is that Chuck Slonecker? I said, yes. He says, of Grant's Anatomy, Chuck Slonecker? I said, yes. He said, I have to meet him. I have to talk with him. I studied his book in the Czech Republic. This is a major person in the medical world. And so Ben was gone. And Chuck was the star of the evening for Radek. Soon Radek was gone too, but however. But then Chuck and Jan were there with me too. And so they've been such close friends since. But truly, I have never seen anybody more thrilled to meet somebody than he was then. So that just shows how far and wide Chuck's renown was. And it was such a pleasure. And we became friends, Chuck and Jan, and then Eilish from ceremonies, and we would go out for dinners and have wonderful times and great laughs and great fun. And it was always so fantastic. And one night I mentioned about wanting to do an opera tea. And Chuck thought that was great. And then I said, you know, I've even thought of doing an opera ball, because we used to have opera balls in Germany, and they were so much fun. And he said, oh, we used to do all kinds of events with President Strangway with costumes. That's what we have to do, is an opera ball with costumes. So there we go, another initiative from Chuck. And so we started the opera ball, and I said, yeah, but Chuck, we need dancing. He said, no problem. No problem. I know the best one for that, Dal Richards. So he went and talked to Dal Richards, and he and Dal were buddies. And he said, Dal, come, help Nancy out. They've got a budget of $1,200. They're fundraising, you know. Can't you help this poor girl? And these kids are so talented. So Dal said, oh, all right, the band will come. So we got the ball going, and Chuck helped to sell it, and we got Dal Richards, and there it is. It's in its, I think, 17th year now, and Chuck started that. And the costumes were there, and we had so much fun. And Dal and Muriel became close friends, just as Chuck and Jan. And so it was just so much fun. And of course, the first opera ball, there is Chuck as Pinkerton from Madame Butterfly, and Jan was Madame Butterfly. So adorable, just incredible. They set the tone. So often I said, Chuck, you have such a great job. And he said, you know, Nancy, when I retire, you should take over that job. I said, you really mean it? I would love to do that job. Now, the director of my school didn't think it was such a good idea, but I said, I can do that job. Oh, you got too much to do. No, I can do that job, right? So Chuck said, you know, maybe you should have this girl do this job, right? And so I became the university marshal. Now, as Eilish said, it took two of us to do what he was doing, right? So I just got part of it, and Eilish got part of it, and so you just see how involved he was. And he would mentor me in this job, and he said to me, you know, Nancy, don't tell the presidents I said this, but being the marshal is the best job in the university. And because, just as Dr. Strangway said, it's because everybody's always happy, and you're always doing something nice, and everybody's appreciative, and they love it, and they're having a great time. And so I said, Chuck, I really think I'd like to do that. But Chuck said to me, you know, Nancy, you've got to go everywhere. You've got to walk through the campus. You've got to meet everybody. You've got to get to know them. You've got to just enjoy what this university really is. And that's truly what he taught me, is what a wonderful place this university is. When we're in our faculties, we're often too much like this. But as the university marshal, you see, oh my God, look at all these wonderful professors, the students, the staff, everything, the donors, the alumni. And Chuck and Jan were always there, and they always cultivated that. In fact, they are Mr. and Mrs. UBC. They really are. And I hate to say it, but sometimes people did mistake them for the president and his wife. Sorry. But they were such a beautiful couple, right? And, you know, Chuck just enjoyed excellence, as you've heard before. He enjoyed academic excellence, performing excellence in the performing arts and fine arts. He enjoyed athletic excellence. And he loved all those people who attained that excellence, but he loved everybody who tried and strived for excellence, even if they didn't quite achieve it. It didn't matter. It was the striving that he loved too. He was always so encouraging. And later on, after the opera ball and opera teas, we got our connection with Bard, as Christopher has said, and that's gone on for 14 years. And we have just had such a wonderful relationship. And Chuck was so happy with that. And we've all been very happy to be able to work with Christopher Gaze. Chuck was a mentor to me, and he guided me not only in the job of the University Marshal, and I'll tell you, it's tricky because you've got that pecking order in that graduation ceremony, and you have to be careful. And you have to have everybody in the right place at the right time, or you can get in big trouble. And so Chuck was very kind in going over that order, and then when I'd panic, when a senator or a judge or somebody would come that hadn't been there before, I'd have to call up Chuck and say, Chuck, what do I do? Where do I put them? How does this happen? And he would always be there for me. But he was a big mentor for me and as a professor here at the university. And he really helped me learn how to follow a good academic path and to strive through the perils of the academia. And I just can't say enough of how I value that mentoring as well. And you know, every time I would go to a ceremony or to an event when I was first marshal, they'd say, oh, you're the new Chuck. I'd say, yeah, I'm the new Chuck. And they'd say, oh, you're Chuck, aren't you? I'd say, yeah. So then finally I just said, hi, I'm Nancy Chuck. And everybody then knew who I was. But you know, you can't say Chuck without Jan, because they were just such a wonderful couple. And you know, as an opera director, when you're directing an opera, you always look for the beautiful couple that you can put downstage and everybody can say, oh, they look so gorgeous. And they were the opera beautiful couple because they were so fantastic together. But it also made me feel so great to see such soulmates in such a long marriage who were so proud of their children and their grandchildren. It just made you feel that the world was right, totally right. And sitting over at their place, having dinner, and Jan, all of you may not know this, but she was a great gardener, and I'm sure she still is. And we would sit out on the balcony having drinks and dinner and just loving her beautiful gardens, and Chuck was always so proud of that. And it just made you feel so good. And we're going to sing about a song about a garden soon and about a couple who found their way together. You know, I only have one regret, Jan, and that's that we never got to Hawaii together. I know. And, you know, Jan and I got to tell you one more story while these young people are coming on stage. Jan and I got in trouble with Chuck once, and that's when we were shopping together. And remember, Jan, we took a little bit too much time, but we had a great time together, and we always said we want to go to Hawaii together. So Jan and Eilish, let's make a girls' trip. And we're going to go to Hawaii, and Chuck would be so proud. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to say that it has been such a blessing to know Chuck, such a blessing to know Jan. UBC has been so blessed to have Chuck Slonecker as a faculty member, as a vice president, as the head of ceremonies, as a friend. And, you know, Canada has been blessed to have Chuck Slonecker, as has the world, because as I started to tell you at the beginning of this speech, his influence was felt all over the world. So we're so blessed and so fortunate, and I can tell you that these people wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for Chuck and Jan's help. So thank you, Chuck. And let's make our garden grow.
I'm Chuck's youngest son, John, and I was so worried no one would get my fantastic references tonight. But if my dad was here right now, he would definitely say, this is fantastic. I want to say a quick thank you from our family to everyone here and to UBC for recognizing how special Chuck was. I also wanted to thank you for giving him an environment to teach and to serve others and take on roles that were outside of his medical expertise that I know were incredibly fulfilling to him as a person. We were all considered family by Chuck. There's no question that us boys won the equivalent of the Powerball lottery when we got mom and dad as our parents. All the traits that made my dad so successful at UBC translated perfectly, both at home as both a husband and a father. Our family was somewhat intertwined with UBC life. You know, a typical day at our home, and to clarify, my parents didn't wear a lot of costumes at home, just here at work. A typical day here at home was finding my dad grading papers or preparing a lecture by the fireplace or seeing him and mom prepare for a UBC event. Although his work was part of our home life, it really was kind of a hobby. We looked at it as a hobby or kind of like more of his social network, so to speak. The great thing is that professionally, he was able to accomplish so much, but we never felt like we needed to share him with UBC. He gave both UBC and us 100%. My dad was a great teacher at UBC and at home. Whether it was giving us advice or lecturing to his students, he truly cared. And it was really his opportunity to make a difference, and he didn't take that lightly. I've met so many of his students in the past 2 years that have told about the profound impact Chuck has had on their medical career. I can remember one of his his teachings that stuck with him when he was young and that he ingrained into all of us boys. And I'm going to read this because if I say it backwards, it means completely the wrong thing. Life is not about what you earn. It's about what you learn. My dad was a great teacher, and you were extremely lucky to have him as one. I think then rather than tell you about where my dad grew up or that his favorite food was rhubarb pie, I think I want to dig a little deeper into some key things that, at least to me, made Chuck so special and provided him with great success, not just as a dad or as an employee, but as a human. If there's a silver lining in what we've gone through in the past couple of years, it's that we got to know our dad on a way different level. And he really hand-delivered us a blueprint for success that we can translate into our own lives. Number one, never underestimate the power of a positive attitude. My dad was the most positive person that I've ever met, and a good chance that you've ever met. It was infectious to say the least, and it drew you to want Chuck to be part of your group or part of your event. In the toughest of times, my dad would always find a way to give a thumbs up or crack a joke to lighten the mood. Whether it was because he truly meant it or because he was just trying to protect you, it was a major contributor in the success of his life. He always stayed positive. Number two, loyalty. My dad was the most loyal person that I had ever met. I remember when I first started helping him and my mom out, I went to pick my dad up one day, and he said, "Johnny, we got to stop and get gas." So I pulled into the nearest gas station, and my dad leaned over and he says, "We can't buy gas here. It's not a Chevron." Dad, gas is gas. So he went on to tell me the story, though, of in tougher times when he was growing up, Chevron had given him a job when he was 12 years old, and it helped his family pay the bills. So it meant so much to his family that he promised never to buy a drop of gas that didn't come from a Chevron pump. If my dad was in your life, he was there for the long haul, and he treated that relationship with utmost respect. It shows in his 55-plus year marriage to my mom and his 50-plus year involvement with UBC. He was extremely loyal. A third component to really what made up my dad was his love for community and friendship. My dad welcomed all people, and he craved that human connection. My dad loved talking and meeting people, even if they were complete strangers. One day I asked my dad, "Why do you take a bus to work?" And his answer was, "I love knowing that I am just a part of a much bigger puzzle. I love seeing people living their lives just like I am." Another example was my dad happened to almost share a birthday with my youngest daughter, so we ended up taking them to Disneyland for his birthday, his and her birthday. And they gave my dad a rather childish button, and it said, "Happy birthday, Chuck." My dad kind of looks at me and says, "What am I supposed to do with this?" Hey, make the kid happy. You wear it when you're at the park. So we put it on, and later that day we show up to the ticket counter, and the lady at the ticket counter yells out, "Happy birthday, Chuck!" Dad reels back like a truck had hit him, and he says, "Are we friends? Do we know each other?" She goes, "No, it's on your button." I don't remember my dad really riding any rides that trip, but I remember how much he enjoyed talking to everyone that approached him about this button. He wore it for all 3 days of the trip. And at the end of our trip, he said, "Out of all the magic and all the billions spent here, this is genius." He loved people. I think I've saved the most important, biggest ingredient in Chuck's recipe for success and happiness in his life. He picked the right partner when he married my mom. It'd be hard to have a day of recognition for Chuck without recognizing Jan Slonecker. Always a staple at UBC events, they were the perfect team and truly came as one in both life and work. Mom, thank you allowing for Dad to reach his full potential at both work and home. You have a love and a bond that very few people will ever experience. How could my dad give 100% to us and 100% to UBC? She's sitting right here. Thanks, Mom. So in closing, once again, I want to thank all for showing us how special Chuck was. I hope we can find a way to keep his spirit alive and well and continuing to influence generations to come at UBC. I think we've accomplished fantastic for him today. Thank you, Eilish and Nancy, and all that have helped pull this together in a way that Chuck would have loved. I'm sure right now my dad would be saying, hey, let's wrap this up. Let's get to the fun. Let's get to the reception. He would want you to punctuate his life with a smile and not a tear. He would also be saying to me, how can you give a speech for me without quoting General George Patton? So here it goes. It is wrong and foolish to mourn a man who has died. Rather, thank God that such a man has ever lived. Thanks.
Thanks, Johnny, and thanks, Christopher and Nancy. And we are wrapping up. Before I end, though, before we end, I'd like to just thank Roseanne, Bill, Nancy, and Caroline for working with us on today's event. Nothing like this is ever done by one person, and as well as my colleagues in ceremonies. I particularly want to thank Patrick Naherney, who's a former grad student of Chuck's. Is he here? Patrick? Oh, there, Patrick. And now an associate professor at UVic, and he put together a slideshow you're going to see. Thank you to Nancy, to David Boothroyd, and to the opera ensemble. You really have made an amazing difference to the event here. It meant a lot. And if you haven't already done so, we have a guest book outside, which we'll be passing all the notes to the family later. We did record today's event, so if anyone missed it, I know some people couldn't come today, it'll be up on our ceremonies website, and the link is in the program. All that remains for me to do is say thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the wonderful life and the wonderful man of Chuck Slonecker. UBC may not have been his alma mater. Okay, now I'm going. But he was blue and gold through and through. Thank you.